Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Love Your Vibe. I'm your host, Sean Robert Grant. So happy to be here with you today, as always. It's so funny because I feel like I'm programmed to say that every single time, and I find it so hilarious. But because of habit, I always do it, and I'm just like, it's crazy. But anyway, I think I say it because I feel it. And I know that it's true. And in learning how to live for the moment, whenever I'm in the moment, the thing that comes to mind is I'm always happy to be here with you. So enough of that jibber jabber. Let's rock, right? Let's rock. So I have been on a journey of immense and complete spiritual awakening. And it has taught me so much about myself. It has helped me to put myself into a place of expanded awareness or expanded consciousness, which is really what this podcast is about. And it's really helped me to understand my thought processes as it relates to my soul, which is my higher self, and as it relates to my ego, which is the personality. I don't want to say the lower self because that's just kind of demeaning, but the ego is the personality, the soul is the higher self, okay? And so the biggest thing is learning how to move or evolve from your ego to your higher self, okay? So how do we do that? Well, the first thing is being able to observe and become aware of what the ego is about. And so the ego is basically thrives on separation, inferiority, superiority, anything that will distinguish you from anybody else, anything that will tear somebody else down to make you look better, anything that will make you feel less than the amazing person or amazing divine being that you are, right, has to do with ego. Now, I was journaling some time ago, and I had an entry that I talked about the ego with. I talked about the ego in this journal entry, and I want to reveal it to you right now because it's the reason for the title of this podcast today, this episode. And that comes down to the ego is the inner child that has the fear of death when it comes to everything. It dreads it, it gets extremely nervous, and it moves into a place of complete paralysis from fear and fear alone. What we need to do is take that inner child and parent it. The problem is most of us are being parented by the ego. So think about this for a moment. Can you imagine you having a child? Let's say your child is 5 or 6 years old and you're 35, 36, and all of a sudden your child is parenting you while you're listening to exactly what they say. Can you imagine how that can be? I know it kind of goes without saying, but that's kind of how the ego works, right? That's kind of how the ego works. And so with the ego, just the thought of your 5 or 6 year old kid telling you what to do, telling you how to handle things, telling you what they need, what they need to have happen from their point of experience and their perspective would drive your life to straight insanity, and that's exactly what it does, right? Kyle Cease said it the absolute best. He said that your mind can only measure what you'll lose oftentimes, right? Your heart usually can measure what you'll lose, but it can also measure what you'll gain from that experience. And to see that, a lot of times your heart being your soul will ask you to move in a direction that seems scary. It can be fearful because you can be like, well, holy shit, like I don't know if even there's a net at the bottom of this cliff that I'm about to jump off of. But something in your heart tells you that it's right, that it's true. But then here comes the ego saying, like, are you nuts? Are you crazy? You know, what happens to kids before they learn how to swim? A lot of times when they learn how to swim, they're afraid of sinking. They're afraid of falling into a place to where they're losing control. And that's the exact thing that happens with the ego. The ego wants control. It wants control over your life and over everything. It needs to be in the knowing, whereas the soul, the heart, works on faith. So I've heard oftentimes about people always saying that we've got to relinquish the ego. And I've even said it myself. It's all about relinquishing the ego, right? But in actuality, we don't need to relinquish it. We just need to parent the ego, right? And by parenting the ego, what do I mean? I mean basically taking care of your inner child, right? Taking care of your inner child and assuring that inner child that everything is okay, but even more so, becoming aware of your inner child, right? When you become aware of your inner child, you know when you're like, you know when your kids start to complain or start to act up that the problem that they're experiencing is just minimal because it's only in their own sphere of experience, right? They can't see anything outside of that. Look at your life from the time you're 5. You know, the problems you have at 5 are pretty much just meaningless to you at 35. But then, you know, you think about once you get to the age of 10, the problems you have at 10, the problems at 5 don't really seem that bad. And then the same with 15. When you're 15, the problems you had at 10 don't seem that bad either, and it just gets better and better and better. So, but just imagine you trying to handle some of the issues you have at 35 with a 5-year-old consciousness. You're going to lose it, right? You're going to lose it, and you're going to be in constant fear. So what we got to do is flip it around. Take the 35-year-old consciousness and handle the issues that we have, right? But more importantly, just come from a higher state of awareness, because the greater expansion of your consciousness you experience, the more you are aware that there aren't really any problems and everything is within your control to be able to approach it from a place that you know there's going to be a solution, because the soul within you, which is your heart, is eternal and it has the answer for everything, right? And that's what higher consciousness does. That is what parenting the ego does, because once the ego is in control, once it's checked, right? And you know it's checked when you're not triggered by anything. You can have thoughts, and then all of a sudden, like a runaway train, you're not grabbing onto the freight car of those thoughts and just screaming up the tracks with them. You know, it then becomes more or less like a train station where, you know, if you don't see your train coming, if the F train, you know, the freedom train is yours, you hop on that train. But if the C train, which is chaos, is coming and you know that's not your train, you let it go by. You feel the effects of it, sure, for that moment, but then you let it go by. A lot of analogies there, but it's cool to it's a cool way to put it. But anyway, you know, it's about being completely aware of how it can get you, because the most dangerous thing is an out of control ego where the soul does not become aware of what it's doing at all times. Like, you've got to be, I've been spiritual progressing and self-actualizing for so long, and even now there's some things that the ego still will try to sneak in and make itself known to everybody involved. And I always have to be aware of that, because for me, it's always about coming from a higher state of consciousness and being 100% connected to my soul, connected to my heart, you know? So if I'm not doing that, then I'm living through my ego, okay? So to wrap it up, the most important thing you can do is, one, become aware of your ego and realize that it's just your inner child. It's just your young self that just needs to be loved. So love it first. You know, love it by, one, forgiving everything that has happened in your life. 2, releasing the idea. See, the only reason we have problems arise from wrong thought, okay? Problems arise from wrong thought. And all wrong thought is just linking up. Once again, it's like those trains linking up to the wrong type of thinking. But when we use the right type of thinking, when we take the consciousness that is within us and put it towards our life and the life that we experience right now, the answers begin to reveal themselves, right? And you'll know, I spent the whole time talking about ego, but one thing I really want you to know before we go is you'll know your heart is speaking to you when it's a calm voice, when there's no fear, when there's peace, when it's filled with love, when it's giving you an option that feels right to your inner being. That's when you know when your soul is giving you advice and giving you guidance. When your ego is, it's sporadic, it's fearful, it's only thinking of yourself, it's casting other people down. And learn to know the difference. Learn to know the difference and start by parenting the ego, connecting with that inner child, forgiving everything that is done, and then moving from a place of expanded awareness, because then you can only make great decisions from being expanded in your consciousness and expanded in your awareness. Guys, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure as always. Take care. We'll talk soon.